Steve's ready? You okay
for us to start?
Yeah, I think we're ready. Yes.
That's cool. Have people actually been tweeting questions and stuff?
No. Yesterday the audio was so bad we couldn't do anything
Oh,
about it.
really?
So hopefully today we've got the audio sorted. Should be better.
Okay, hello everybody. Very good of you to come to this plenary. Thanks for coming. If you haven't already been welcome to Durham, officially welcome to Durham. Welcome to paradise. Here we live in the but I just wanted to say a few words about Durham and why we have this wonderful spot here with Cymene and Dominic to talk to us. I wanted to talk a bit about the sub-theme of environment and energy in the programme because Durham has had a very interesting history of work in this field and developing the field as a sort of new frontier. When I arrived in Durham 10 years ago, we had a development anthropology research group, which sort of still exists, but we were drawn into collaborations with the newly set up Durham Energy Institute. Okay, so this was a very interesting initiative, and I think anthropologists at Durham, from the experience of having worked in the development kind of field to a certain extent, and collaborating with other researchers around development issues, and developing critical perspectives on development issues in the global south, there was a willingness to engage with other disciplines, with engineers, with geographers, with earth scientists even, around the emerging issues and topics of energy. Since I've been here also, we've thanks to Steve Lyon here, who's about to initiate the live streaming of this event, so that's all very awesome. But Steve, when I arrived, he said, Ben, do you want to help with this Masters in Development? So the Masters in Development turned into the Sustainability, Culture and Development MSc, and we also now have the Energy and Society Masters Programme, which is the first in the country to have a programme like that. And sort of looking at the relationships between research, policy, practice and publics. This has been an important aspect. I also wanted to just mention the cover of the handbook, okay? This is a photograph I took in northern Nepal 5 years ago, okay? This was to do with the film I was making called The Way of the Road. The road was being planned to be built up to the Tibetan-Chinese border through northern Nepal. And then this kind of caught the sort of co-evil, I think Bob Simpson and Elizabeth have rather nicely written about what this image evokes for them in terms of the poignancy of suggesting movement, inequality, destinations and co-evil narratives with uncertain endings. So there we go. Last year in Nepal there was a infrastructural breakdown in terms of connection between Nepal and India, and so the track, now that this path was, the photograph was taken of, was after the trade and transit dispute with India. It was used to carry aviation fuel from China into Nepal so that people's flights out of Kathmandu. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, the kind of unanticipated consequences of some of these issues. So when I proposed this theme for the programme, I knew immediately who to invite as our plenary speakers, who to turn to as first choice. Now, I've looked at the web pages. It's absolutely awesome, the number of publications they've produced, and from, interestingly, where you're coming from, through media and through intimate. Sorry, what's the title? There you go. Fantastic. So we're seeing interesting convergences, I think, onto the theme of energy transitions and Aeolian politics. And of course, the developing field that you're working into is now to do with Iceland and the measurement of ice. And I just thought, a week after England, Barnabas exits, not only from but from the football competition in Europe. I think it's a very appropriate moment in which I hand over to you. Please save us.
Thank you for the introduction, Ben, for the invitation to come here. And I have to say, we did hold back on wearing our Iceland football gear for our presentation today. We tried to get a set, but they're all sold out because we heard that Scotland had purchased everything. So we're really happy to be back in Durham. This has become kind of a second home in a sense for us. We spent some time here 2 years ago at the Institute for Advanced Study and got to know a lot of wonderful people who are working on really important intersections around energy and environment. And then most recently for the Electrifying Anthropology Conference that was sponsored by Better Brand, which was also fantastic. So we're really thrilled to be back here again and look forward to your comments and your thoughts. In some places, the dust never seems to settle. Throughout Mexico's existence of Anthropocene, wind finds its way everywhere. 15 particular matter, raising small stones from the road, harassing the matted fur of the dog, pressing itself against the lofty blades of turbines. The wind isthmus as everywhere is a negotiation between gases that are compelled across space and time by combinations of heat and cold differentials of that. This is the physicality of the wind, its material life. Wind gets contoured by objects in its path, mountains and hills, cliffs and stands of forests, buildings and creatures. It also exercises its force upon these things, carving, cracking, and pressuring, leaving beneficial imprints. It draws our attention to points of contact and interconnections. It is a relief from the heat, a force to struggle against, and a welcome luster that blows smoke from our eyes. But the power of the wind is not singular. It is as multiple as the world that it inhabits. Winds both absorb and form their contexts and their conditions. Careening across the narrow curve of Mexico in the southern state of Oaxaca, and thanks to the barometric pressure differentials between the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean, the winds of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec are among the steadiest and strongest winds to cross land anywhere in the world. They have been a nuisance and a cosmological force to Isthmians for centuries. But in the late 20th century, these winds became an opportunity to generate electricity and to build capital. Facing the twilight of petro-statecraft, Mexico established some of the most far-reaching and comprehensive greenhouse gas reduction legislation in the world. Most recently, it has agreed, along with the United States and Canada, to provide 50% of the nation's electricity from non-carbon power sources by the year 2025. The Isthmus now represents the densest concentration of onshore wind development anywhere on the planet. And Mexico now holds the position as the second largest producer of wind power in Latin America. By the end of 2015, 80% of that installed wind power in Mexico, a total of 2,300 megawatts, was located in the Isthmus. If Mexican policy and infrastructural commitments offer a future of ecologically sourced power, it is also true that the country's wind boom has catalyzed new alliances and conflicts at both local and national levels. Those supporting wind power development speak of global climatological good and local economic development. Those opposed to wind parks make accusations of economic imperialism, with foreign capitalists coming once again to colonize the region with their extractive methods. Local landowners who receive rents Local bosses or caciques are viewed with suspicion, and politicians are often accused of taking bribes or embezzling funds. Questions about indigenous people's sovereignty and campesinos' rights also loom large. In the isthmus, the wind may carry laudable dreams to reduce anthropogenic harm, but it is also and increasingly freighted by the politics that manage its material life. Our purpose in this discussion is to unravel the notion that wind power exists as a consolidated conceptual object. If we take seriously the vitality of matter, as Jay Bennett has urged us to do, then we need to understand that in an effluence, such as wind, we find trajectories that are not necessarily intended. In a time when carbon incineration has been exposed as among the greatest ecological threats to humanity and to other life on the planet, renewable energy forms like wind power are commonly assumed to have a clear, logical, and obvious salvational purpose. We are thus invited to embrace wind power as an objective force for good. But in our research, we have also found that wind power is nowhere singular, nor is it objective. And if it is good, it is only for some and not for others. We thus offer an argument against a singular interpretation of wind power, and instead we work towards surfacing its manifold effects and ways of mattering. We call this domain Aeolian politics. By this we mean the multiple and contingent political trajectories of the wind and its materialized forms, as it is domesticated for electric energy, as it is made a commodity, and as it is taken as a redemptive metaphor for a world in climatological peril. To articulate this multiplicity, we offer several snapshots of Aeolian politics, showing how wind power is contoured by land and desire, and by infrastructure and technological management. We see entanglements of cosmologies and subjectivities played out in the domain of sustainable development. Our mapping of what Philippe Descola would call an ecology of relationships does not find deep divisions between the ontological capacities of nature and society, but instead allows for a careful probing of their recompositions. In fact, the physicality of the wind, its material form, provides a very distinctive take on the natures of power and purpose. Unlike other so-called resources, such as water, land, or oil, wind evades enclosure. It is nothing if it is not movement, and thus it is a force that is not easily made into a property thing. It is elementally loose, a force that can only ever be captured but never contained. While the force of the wind has long been domesticated by human actors, milling grain, flying kites, blowing ships to the New World, industrial scale electricity generation and the sprawl of wind parks is unprecedented both in the isthmus and in the world. Thus, we need to understand how wind is now known differently, not as it has been for millennia, but as a renewable resource and as green energy. Wind power is presently designated as a force with the potential to redraft the energetic relationship between humanity and the environment, and to take up the mantle of global climatological care. Here, we are looking for analytical balance and critical engagement in an imbalanced world. And our concerns are situated not simply in the plane of academic debate, but within the unprecedented global environmental challenges faced by planetary life. Anthropocenic conditions of climate change, species extinction, and ocean acidification prompt us to accent the contemporary and unparalleled restructuring of Earth's biosphere, lithosphere, aquasphere, and atmosphere. Tremendous anthropogenic shifts like global warming, as Timothy Morton has described, can be taken as hyper-objects, those things beyond human scale in their reach and in their duration. These kinds of phenomena produce epistemic ruin. They place a mirror to human conceits and reflect a conspicuous fragility. Our present refigurations between human and non-human worlds demand that we imagine possibilities beyond material determinisms and social structural theories that have underwritten the industrializing logics of the past 3 centuries. Our theoretical futures, in other words, have the potential to go in many different directions, and maybe they ought to. And wind may have purchased here as an epistemic model that is restless, that is always in motion, that belongs to no one, and somehow always insinuates itself into our quotidian, creating pressures that are needed in a time like the Anthropocene. We are, after all, navigating very turbulent environmental futures here. The north wind whips through in the streets, papers and leaves are chased with resentment, houses moan, dogs curl into balls. There is something in the afternoon's finger, a catfish spine, a rusty nail. Who can tell me why I meditate on this afternoon? Why is birthed in me to knife the heart of whoever uncovered the mouth of the now whipping wind? To jam corn cobs in the nose of the ghost that pants outside. Victor Terán is a poet and a teacher. He is also a man wholly opposed to the spread of wind power projects across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, his native land. Victor's renown as a literary figure and a proponent of Bini-Za, or Zapotec, cultural and linguistic preservation, preceded his fame as an outspoken critic of the wind parks. The place where we were finally able to meet Victor one Sunday afternoon evinced none of these political or preservationist qualities. Instead, it was an utterly forgettable, but more or less accurately named, restaurant called La Internacional. The cafe had somewhat a dubious reputation of attracting Spaniards who were involved in the wind industry. And it was also one of the few places in a very hot town that could boast of air conditioning, which seemed an apt climate for our conversation about other kinds of air and wind and breath and everything alive. You know, the wind has many meanings, Victor began. In Zapotec, the word is bi, and bi is what designates the air and the breath. It is the soul of a person, and it animates everything. Linguistically, Victor explained the concept of bi is used to describe all animate beings, and it is for this reason that nearly all of the Bini-Za words used to designate an animal or a plant begin with the prefix bi, including Bini-Za, which means the people itself. Bini represents a seed, its reproductive essence, and so it is possible to say that Bini is the soul or the seed of a person, their inherent substance. Bi names the pig that makes the sound BB, and it names the maggot that crawls from dead flesh. Bikuti is the creature that is a product of spoiling meat and that enhances fleshly decomposition. The metaphoric life of language was of interest to Victor, and he was keenly aware that B is etymologically inherent to expression, its structure in a lexicon, in the same way that it is fundamental to life. Victor put it simply, without the air, we would not exist. Without the wind, we would not exist. The first animates, and the second is animated. Cosmologically, there is a trinity of winds in Zapotec, two from the north and the other from the south. The old north wind of Diego should not be mistaken for a feeble wind. It is in fact the opposite. The wind that made the world with its astounding force and its primal intensity. A less storied wind, but one that all Hispanios know equally well, is the northern wind that is quotidian and less dramatic, but still insistent when it blows. And finally, there is the southern wind, Bini-Za, the wind of the sea and the water, a revitalizing and gentle wind that soothes the heat. It gathers across the Laguna de Mar Muerto in this, and the air life breath is married with Bini-Za, the breeze, and in this union it becomes moist. Bini-Za is often described as a feminine wind, a more tender sensation, especially in contrast to the northern winds, which are inversely described as masculine. The dusty northern wind of Diego is also often called the devil's wind. Its heat and intensity make it seem as though it has come from Lucifer's lips. These winds across the centuries that through cosmologies old and new emerge and mingle in the imagination. What wind is this that can double as both wicked and redemptive all at once? In the town of La Ventosa, the wind is a power that cannot be ignored. It comes in gusts and gales, it topples 18-wheel semi-trucks, and means that some trees will only ever leaf and branch in one direction. It makes clothing cling like cellophane, and it will have you lose your footing. Its occasional calm is usually abbreviated, and it is for this reason, in part, that the town of La Ventosa is now completely surrounded on all sides by wind parks, in every direction and at every terminus of every street in this little hamlet. For Don Julio, wind power has been a boon. Passing through the carport gate that separates his house from the road, he remarks on the quality of the wind at that moment. He offers that it's not bad today, just average, as he sets about arranging folding chairs on the concrete slab in front of his windows. Somewhere behind the wall is a young woman, maybe his daughter, who is preparing plastic cups full of atole, a sugary cornflower drink. Don Julio's home is relatively untroubled by the wind-blown dust that clings to almost everything in La Ventosa. He lives on a recently paved stretch of road, and the novelty of pavimentación was bestowed by the local government in collaboration with a wind energy company that has its park just on the border of town. Don Julio, a landowner who has leased parcels of his property to the company, appears to be doing quite well. His large two-story home is fresh with paint, and he attributes his relative prosperity to his contract with the wind power company and to the monthly rental income from turbine and road placement that it has generated for him. Don Julio epitomizes the developmentalist dreams of wind power in the isthmus. His growing wealth is imagined to flow in a trickle-down fashion to other less fortunate residents, shopkeepers, laborers, and others without any land. Don Julio openly shares his story, situating it within a longer history of his native town. After the atole has been drunk, and we have heard a genealogy of renewable energy development in La Ventosa, Don Julio returns us again to the wind. He wants us to know that the wind itself has made him strong. Like everyone in the isthmus, he explains, living with El Norte has an impact upon a person. El Norte picks up rocks, pebbles, and sand, and it hits you in the face. It gets everywhere. And you have to stand up against it and keep working and keep going in spite of it. It makes you tough. It makes you unafraid. Don Julio is clear about the fact that the turbines on his land and the power of the wind have made him richer. But he also recognizes how the wind has crafted Aeolian subjects, humans that are abraded and contoured and effectively shaped by the wind. Wind power, captured in a conversation and a series of cosmologies about how the wind makes people and what people make of the wind. Just as the wind is an oscillation between gases, so too is wind defined by a reciprocal exchange between air, humans, and non-human entities. Wind's relationality is important, in fact indexical. As Karen Barad has reminded us, it is relationality that produces entities as phenomena. And it is these assemblages, inseparabilities, and entanglements that shift how we configure things and forces as subjects and as objects. Wind tends to refuse the visual register, except in those places where it touches and moves something else. A child's pencil drawing of curled lines is a depiction of the wind, as are the graphs and charts produced by meteorologists. But the wind is ultimately only made visible through its impact and influence on other matter, other materials, and other beings. Wind cannot condone separateness as an inherent feature of how the world is. Its phenomenological materializations create Aeolian subjects, and like the air out of which it is made, it thrives on interplay into and against bodies. Captured by the meters of energy production, but still residing in the domains of myth, legend, and experiential value, wind power is a force of consciousness.
What we call wind power is rarely separable from land in the isthmus of Tehuantepec. This is not only because the fierce air always carries earth within itself, but also because so many local reckonings with force return to the question of who controls La Tierra. Since terrestrial wind power necessitates large tracts upon which to position turbines, substations, power lines, and access roads, one often finds the politics of wind bent back to the earth and to its masters. This gravity is felt strongly in Juchitán, a Benizat city with a legacy of indigenous political resistance to external power deeply woven into its local knowledges of self and the other, Juchitecos say they had never really capitulated to foreign powers, not to the federales of Mexico City, not to the mestizos Zapotec of the Oaxacan Valley, not to Cortez and his conquistadors, not even to the Aztec Empire. For centuries, the isthmus has existed on the fringes of imperial desire, a place known throughout Mexico for its violent and ungovernable population, for its resources, cycling between projects of political and economic assimilation and periods of cultural renaissance. Intense conflicts over land tenure have saturated the area around Juchitán for several decades. The Mexican Constitution of 1917 was revolutionary for its recognition of the pluricultural basis of the nation and for its bestowal of extensive rights, in theory anyway, to indigenous peoples. Article 27 of that Constitution recognized the right of indigenous peoples to communal ownership and management of ancestral lands via assemblies, and it guaranteed that these lands could be reclaimed from colonial hacienda estates if necessary. Haciendismo was not actually as prevalent as the isthmus as it was in other regions of Mexico, in part because of resilient indigenous traditions of communal land use, and in part because its semi-arid plains were not well suited to large-scale agriculture. Yet even as communal land use declined during the course of the 20th century, the asambleas remained strong in many parts of the isthmus. In 1960, around the time the serious land troubles began, 38% of the land still existed in a communal property regime, bienes comunales, as opposed to only 6% in Mexico more generally. Property rights were less actively sought in the traditional agricultural arrangement in which use, possession, and ownership of land blended together. The catalyst for an intensified politics of property was the building in the 1960s of the Benito Juarez Dam near Jalapa del Marqués, northwest of Juchitán. The dam project created an irrigation system designed to allow tens of thousands of hectares to receive adequate water for more intensive and profitable forms of agriculture. Even before the dam was built, land speculation swept across the region, encouraging the wealthy smallholder peasants to accumulate plots. Speculation consolidated estates, swelled the ranks of landless peasants, and sharpened class distinctions. The federal government recognized the potential for serious political unrest and intervened with 2 decrees designed to limit speculation and restore communal land traditions around Juchitán. But the infelicitous wording of the first decree in 1964 seemed to deny any possibility of smallholder property, which caused the smallholders to rise in turn against the state. The second decree in 1966 reinstated smallholder titles but left murky the relationship between possession and ownership of land. A landless peasant movement, Cosei, began to form in the early 1970s, using land occupation as its chief political strategy, seizing what it viewed as inalienable communal lands back from the landed peasant class. This complex and contentious history of tierra has shadowed every step of 21st century wind development in the isthmus. This is particularly clear in La Ventosa, a township of Juchitán and the site of the first commercial wind farm in Mexico, Parques Ecológicos de México. La Ventosa stands at the western edge of what's regarded to be the windiest corridor of the isthmus, with average annual wind speeds of 30 kilometers per hour and top speeds in winter of 100 kilometers per hour. But the reason that La Ventosa came to be encircled by wind turbines has more to do with the politics of land than the technical quality of wind. Since the 1980s, La Ventosa has been the epicenter of militant smallholder politics in the isthmus. The town's current cacique, or boss, Don Porfirio Montero Fuentes, a local pre-party and evangelical Christian leader, rose to power fighting street battles against Cosei in the 1980s. As local historian Jose Lopez de la Cruz recalled, quote, Porfirio talked a lot about how the Reds would come and steal our land from us, and then Cosei did actually try to occupy a large plot of land here, which belonged to an administrator of Juchitán. I remember Porfirio leading a group of armed men down the street with guns, sticks, machetes, everything they had, and eventually they drove the Coseistas off. Ironically, Montero celebrated his victory by taking the majority of the administrator's land for himself. He subsequently became a fierce advocate for private property rights in the isthmus and used his growing political influence in the governing Cree party to secure something approximating a private property regime around the town. Montero also developed close relationships with Spanish renewable energy companies like Iberdrola and Acciona, encouraging them to rent his lands to create wind farms in La Ventosa. He describes himself as the father of Oaxacan wind development, the one who, by grace of God, saw the future first. The claim is debatable, but it's not accidental that the first privately funded turbines appeared in La Ventosa. It was Montero who personally guaranteed that capital investments would be safe there, that contracts would be upheld by the authority of the state, or better yet, by him and his allies. We interviewed Montero around the time the town's first turbines were coming on the grid, and he told us he was upset that the lack of government mediation had led to meager returns on long-term rental contracts of 20 years or more. He explained, for 10 years, I've been telling the government that they need to create a committee to regulate what's going on down here, and no one's listened to me. Why can't we earn closer to the price that the government's paying for the electricity? We are the ones producing the energy from our land. We are the ones living with the turbines. But we're only getting about 1.5% of the profits. It's a dirty business. Montero's thinking was clearly transitioning from a logic of land to a logic of energy, that he wanted rents calculated not by hectare but by megawatt. 100,000 pesos per megawatt was his proposal. Yet he'd only come halfway, and that he still viewed wind as a fixed material resource, much like land. Quote, it can be low, medium, or high, but the wind, it's always blowing, he assured us. Bankers in Mexico City later confided that the Spaniards had been very creative and persistent in the matter of land rents. They even invented entirely new kinds of rents that don't exist anywhere else in the world, a project financier explained to us. One of these is the derecho de viento, a payment to the individual or community for the wind's passage over a given area of land over to a turbine. It's literally a terrestrial easement placed on the kinetic force of wind. In Ixtepec, a town to the northwest of Wichita, a group of comuneros and an NGO are working together to develop what would be the first communally owned wind park project in Latin America. Unlike the commercial model of paying 1.5 to 2.5% of profits to rentiers, 50% of the net revenues from the Ixtepec park would be returned to the comuna and put toward local social projects and a retirement fund for aging farmers. Daniel Gonzalez is one of the leaders in the initiative and a lawyer in town, but he's also the grandson of a rancher and a farmer. Now his grandfather's lands belong to him, he told us. But along that road where there used to be ranch after ranch, there are only now 4 remaining. You know how many people still live out there? Just 1. In his retirement, he's taken up growing sorghum, 10 acres, and that has taught him how much the 1960s infrastructure of irrigation has collapsed over the years as fewer and fewer farmers work to maintain it. Other infrastructures are in decline as well, those that link land and language and ethnicity. Daniel spoke Zapotec in his youth, even though almost all his professional life he looked at Spanish. He's now teaching his grandson Zapotec, taking him on weekends out to the villages around the isthmus where Zapotec is still the spoken language. The future of the communal wind park project remains uncertain. The National Electricity Utility, CFE, will not allow them to bid for access to the grid because the Comuna and its NGO partner do not have sufficient capital in the bank and letters of credit to do so. It's a vicious cycle, the NGO founder tells us. We could easily get sufficient capital to build the park from social investors and banks in Europe, but they'll only guarantee that credit if we have a contract with CFE for access. The Comuna elected to challenge CFE in court. An added twist is that CFE built the largest substation in Latin America on communal Ixtepecan land in order to evacuate all that new electricity from the isthmus wind farms to the high-voltage cables headed towards Mexico City. The Comuna is arguing that CFE never sought to get a contract for the use of that land. It didn't even formally expropriate it. They simply occupied the land and began building a substation. It's a squatter grid. As Daniel explained to us, this was a case of exploitation and theft, despojo, on 2 grounds. First, the illegal occupation of our land by the substation, and second, by refusing us the right to even compete for access to that substation. Several years later, the complaint is still winding through the Mexican court system, although Daniel is optimistic that a political solution will be reached to allow the communal park project to proceed. Elsewhere in Ixtepec, a city of few landed peasants and many landless migrants, optimism regarding wind power slackens. Like many places where debates over wind power cluster, questions of equity are often central. Raul Mena, one of the many educated yet underemployed people in town, told us that even if the park happened, it would only benefit the comuneros anyway. The farmers kept to themselves, maintaining a tradition of communal agriculture that he felt offered little by way of a future to Ixtepec's youth. We asked Raul to whom the Ixtepecan wind belonged, and he said, to us, to all of us here, it's not like terreno, a plot of land, but it is partly of the tierra, earth. We have a similar conceptual slippage in English between the earth and land undoubtedly owed to our own agrarian heritage, but Raul was making a more specific point. The wind was not like the land of the Comuna. It was not terreno, earth alienable parcel that could belong to just some Ixtepecans. The wind thus hinted at the possibility of a broader redistributive commons, a binding to airborne arid soil, answering the yearning of mantis Cymenios to reconnect to their earth. We discovered through our research in Ixtepec that wind power, what we call wind power, was also very much about the technopolitics of energy infrastructure, and specifically about the administration of la red, the grid. It was not solely the political and legal challenges the squatter grid faced in Ixtepec that troubled further development, but also the engineering challenges involved in harvesting and integrating wind energy, especially the turbulent wind of the isthmus. When we spoke to administrators and engineers at CFE, we were rather surprised to discover widespread ambivalence bordering on hostility about wind power. Although there was general agreement that Mexico had wonderful wind resources that ought to be utilized in some way, our interlocutors expressed concern that the nature of the wind did not correspond well to the needs and logical grid. From the perspective of the administration of energy, there's a type of energy we call baseload, energía base. Francisco Diaz, the department director at CFE, explained, tapping on his desk. Above all, this is thermoelectric energy, where you supply it with combustible fuel, and it works just like a motor. It's muy constante. It's very constant. Geothermal is that way too, but with all other sources, even hydroelectrics, output will depend on the rains of the previous year. So in a dry year, we might not have enough supply to meet demand. It's the same with las eólicas, the turbines. You might have peak supply and average supply, but those are just numbers. In reality, the supply is constantly fluctuating between highs and lows. And for that reason, in most cases of wind energy, you need to build extra thermoelectric support installations just to guarantee supply. Perversely then, according to the engineers, if you build wind parks, you would also have to build even more fossil fuel plants just to guarantee that average supply can be maintained on windless days. Consumers were constantly hungering for energy, quote, and they knew nothing about how it's generated, one engineer lamented. They simply want la luz, the light, the electricity, when they turn on the switch. The principal fear of the electrical engineer was that the thrown switch would yield nothing but further darkness, a negation of their professional expertise and administrative competence. Journalists in Mexico City told us stories about how, until relatively recently, CFE would sometimes shut down power to entire factories for hours without warning, simply because they had problems maintaining domestic supply. Many Mexican companies began building their own generating plants as a result, and private electricity generation now accounts for over 30% of the total national supply. Even so, we found that the overriding concern of CFE was that the grid, which remained their property and responsibility, that it needed to be kept full, swollen, with constante electrical enablement. Intermitencia, intermittency, was a congenital deficiency of renewable energy, sources like solar and wind, and it often seemed to us that they wished that they could be rid of them. To be fair, CFE officials also expressed pride in Mexico's participation in the Kyoto Protocol and understood the environmental disadvantages of the intensification of fossil fuel use. They simply felt, as administrators of energy, that intermittency was a plague on their work. And this administrative suspicion towards renewables extends far beyond Mexico. For example, a study released in 2014 by the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation, NERC, opens with the statement, quote, "The North American bulk power system is facing a perfect storm of reliability threats that could result in significant changes to the way the power grid is planned and operated." The threats in question were principally solar and wind installations that troubled the constancy of electrical supply. Scenarios like this one the NRC commissioned for California in 2020 visualize the new problematics of engineering reliability. In the scenario depicted, we see abundant daytime solar energy forcing grid operators to scale up and down baseload fossil fuel electricity generation over a period of a few hours, necessitating greater real-time attention to supply and demand fluctuation. Yet conventional thermoelectric and nuclear plants cannot be turned on and off like a light switch. They take hours to come up to full generation capacity. Thus, even with abundant renewable energy, a commitment to baseload means keeping extra megawatt capacity spinning, as it's called, when it's not needed. A practice grid managers view as wasteful and expensive, negating much of the supposed advantages of energy transition. Electrical engineers also point to cases like Germany, where 35% of electricity is now generated from renewables. There, the economic fortunes of utility operators have flagged, since they are legally required to provide bulk baseload electricity as costs mount and revenues decline, making it an increasingly precarious venture. And they say that Denmark, which in some months produces over 60% of its electricity from grid power, can only do so because its grid is interconnected with surrounding countries with more conventional electricity generation. thus distributing the risk of unpredictably high and absent wind. There's more bad news still. A recent study by physicists found that wind energy is more volatile and turbulent than had been previously calculated. In the researchers' study of a German wind farm, they found that as wind speed altered, the power output of the farm could change by as much as 50% within 2 minutes. Regardless of how far apart turbines are spaced, the physics of wind power strains grid infrastructure and engineering designed for thermoelectric constancy. Thus, that squatter substation Ixtepec Potencia, the largest and most technologically advanced substation in Latin America, is not deemed solely a danger to the Ixtepecan Comuneros, but also with certain respect to the national grid itself. Absent the capacity for massive energy storage, Ixtepec Potencia imports risk to the Mexican national grid. To help combat the threat, CFE purchased a state-of-the-art static VAR compensation system from the Swiss firm ABB to mitigate power oscillations. As an ABB spokesperson explained, even before wind power, grid operators have faced the challenge to balance the power produced and the power consumed due to the fact that energy is technically today still expensive to store. So all power produced has to be consumed. In the old days, the challenge of balancing was mostly due to the variations in the demand side and disturbances caused by long transmission lines. Today, with these new forms of clean energy, the challenge is greater as disturbances also come from the generation side, which before was more easily controlled. These are the energopolitics of renewable energy, the front lines of transformational struggle hidden within the infrastructural ubiquity and opacity of la red. Hidden too is the growth imperative of grid needing massive demand to meet massive supply, since all power produced has to be consumed. Ismaiah critics of wind power recognize this paradox very clearly. One activist told us, quote, "All these supposed clean energy is going to power more Walmarts and more cement factories, and those are the true problem." And yet, Mexico's green revolution still advances.
The Kyoto Protocol never demanded that the country of Mexico reduce its emissions, and yet President Felipe Calderon, who governed the country from 2006 to 2012, inaugurated legislation that made Mexico one of only 2 developing countries in the world to enshrine long-term comprehensive climate targets into federal law. In June 2009, the federal government formally committed to a detailed plan for emissions reductions, targeting a 30% drop in emissions by 2020. Calderon's decision to pursue this legislation was compelled by his long-standing interest in environmental protection, which, he explained to us, stemmed from when he was a teenager and first learned about ice cap melts, deforestation, acid rain, and the ecological limits of growth. Calderon sees his country as deeply implicated in the fossil fuel complex, with up to 43% of the federal government budget dependent upon the profits of Pemex, the national oil company. Vulnerable to the fiscal turbulence of oil as a commodity, and equally susceptible to the contingencies of a carbonized climate, he explained that sooner or later, Mexico will need to face the problems related to climate change. Because while Mexico is an oil producer, it is also one of the countries that will suffer the most, the consequences, and is suffering already, he explained. When it comes to oil, he went on, you can depend less, every day if you decide to. Deciding to depend less on oil and to generate sustainable forms of energy is also a move to intervene in a series of ethical questions. While wind power may reduce carbon combustion, its production also risks failing to question the growth imperative of modernity. As power consumption endures, energy production, now greener, can continue to generate profits. One wonders what might happen if we were to stall the blades and rest for a moment on our desire to always have power at our service. Where wind parks have bloomed in every direction, the advent of renewables and carbon mitigation targets have raised questions about how renewable energy projects may disenfranchise local populations and limit local autonomy to determine how land, air, and water are to be used and managed. Wind power thus becomes a site of political contestation and scalar debates about the good of the planet versus the good of the people. In this fraught struggle over interests, ethical tensions are pulled more taut. For while wind power is an energetic source, to be sure, it is also a device through which corporate and state interests craft their ecological profile and proclaim moral authority in the practice of climatological care. The inauguration of a wind park near Santo Domingo in Henio will be President Calderon's last of many wind park ribbon-cutting ceremonies. When he served as the Secretary of Energy, Calderon hoped to establish the first wind park in Mexico. Now, as his presidential term nears its end, wind power accounts for the majority of Mexico's clean development mechanisms. Calderon's speech today is not triumphant, nor is it a swan song. Instead, it pivots between hope and precarity. He begins with droughts, the most severe ever seen in Mexico and to the north in Texas. This is climate change, he says to his audience of several hundred seated in front of him. Carbon dioxide is like a sweater surrounding the earth, heating the ocean's waters and making for both more and less rain that is, overall, differently distributed. However, he goes on, we cannot stop using electricity or building factories. Instead, we need to make electricity with less smoke. We need to reduce emissions. The president then calls attention to the engineering careers that wind power has brought to Oaxaca, and to the jobs in the supermarkets, now more plentiful because of the economic spillover of wind power. The Mexican Ministry of Energy has also lauded the growth of renewable energy projects. The winds of Oaxaca are, according to Cymene, an opportunity to reduce emissions without compromising national economic development, an opportunity to contribute to climate change mitigation, an opportunity to attract investment to Mexico, an opportunity to develop local capabilities, an opportunity for technological development, an opportunity to increase the nation's global competitiveness. One of the reasons that opportunity so fluidly emerges in state discourses is that in addition to being the site of some of the best wind in the world, Oaxaca is also one of the poorest states in the entire country, a place where economic development is often prioritized in government programs and politicians' ambitions. If it weren't for the wind, said the Director of Sustainable Energy for the state of Oaxaca, there would be no development. For many state officials, their conviction to promote economic development through sustainable means is in part a moral calling to bring prosperity to the region. The future of the isthmus is here buried, with the development plans of private capital in a tidy moral tale that is often described as win-win-win. Governmental officials and corporate sponsors designate a series of environmental and economic futures as the proper way forward, and in turn they burnish their own green reputational value. Wind power is then positioned as a remedial intervention of ecological care, a generator of economic gain and technological potential. But wind power is also the material instantiation of an ethical exercise. It is intended, at least nominally, to benefit the greater good of local populations and the Mexican nation, and ultimately to be in service to the greater good of the planetary bios. But questions remain as to how it will be so.
In his turn to face the Anthropocene, Bruno Latour has mused about the fading wind critique. Citing his own role in calling attention to the constructiveness of scientific facts, Latour laments the ink given to climate change denialists whose tactics seem eerily parallel. He worries about deconstruction, about destruction, and hopes to refocus our attention not on matters of fact, but rather on matters of concern. What we call wind power is one such matter of concern. It's by turns object, operator, and index, ever a venti factish over which corporate executives, politicians, engineers, landowners, activists, neighbors, and anthropologists can all exert their varying degrees of epistemic and moral authority. Wind power is the nexus for a series of competing and often also compelling ethical projects, forms of expertise, and political claims. Wind power offers a medium in which propositions of value circulate and ultimately manifest in an abundance of material political forms, among them turbines, substations, voltage regulators, carbon credits, rents, and profits. But the urgency of the Anthropocene means that we also need to practice deconstructing and reconstructing some of our more comfortable objects of salvation. For as this analysis shows, What we call wind power is not one but many things, different ensembles of force, matter, and desire. Wind power has no summary. It's a matter of pressures, flows, and frictions, air moving around and through efforts by authoritative discourse and knowledge to orchestrate it as a simple object of analysis, intervention, and action. We do not doubt that wind power has objective political efficacy any more than we doubt that the Cymene winds are capable of blowing the roofs off houses, stripping the paints off boats, and mangling tractor trailers. But to stay true to that wind, it blows in many directions and intensities. It's the cruel wind of the devil as much as the soft breeze of redemption. If there's a takeaway message from this project, it's simply that some constellations of what we call wind power may be capable of blowing us beyond the Anthropocene. Others will leave us exactly where we are. A wind power driven by caciquismo and capital is not the same one driven by comuna and commons. We can seek a more verdant Anthropocene, or allow venti politics and heliopolitics and hydropolitics and material politics as yet unknown to unleash new human political potentialities and institutions, just as petropolitics did abundantly in its era. We thus must weigh our possible Aeolian futures with care, purpose, and humility. So to conclude, a final comment on the task of criticism in the Anthropocene. Our exploration here of Aeolian politics and Aeolian futures has obviously absorbed much inspiration from political materialism and from the broader anti-anthropocentric turn in the human sciences. But we would argue that we should not be so too comfortable in those revelations. Yes, materials, forces, and infrastructures matter to wind power, but so do science, discourse, phenomenology, policy, agency. If we pass gently into the post-human without demanding accountability for the modern human species being that continues to warm the earth and extinguish its life forms, the task of criticism will remain incomplete. We thus urge political materialism and more traditionally anthropocentric political analysis to work constructively and collaboratively together to develop the critical analytics adequate to the epistemic and ethical challenges of what Anasing has termed a damage plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominic and Cymene. That was utterly amazing. And yes, I think you covered so many angles of the qualities of wind and the physical dimensions as well being brought in. Gave us an incredible amount to think about. And we have a good half an hour to take questions. Wayne, are you here? You've got the roving mic. So we have a mic here that we can pass around. Does anybody? Yes.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. I was wondering, in particular, in relation to what was said in the end about this is now the wind politics, and it has certain differences and similarities with the petropolitics and the hydropolitics and all these other. So it left me wondering, though, so what is specific about the wind here? I mean, what is different here? And it's not about coffee, it's not about oil. What is the specific Aeolian politics? Or is it?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the key elements that we wanted to bring out in the paper and the research in general is that the wind is a very specific commodity, if you want to put it into those terms. It may have volatile pricing, like coffee or oil, but it's fundamentally a different form of energy because it is constantly in motion. And the moment that it stops, it's no longer wind. It no longer has that kinetic energy within it to be able to produce anything, including electricity. So its materiality is important for the way that we think about it. And I think we would take it as fundamentally different from something that can be contained, can be shipped, can have its energy burned like a piece of coal. It has a fundamental material quality to it that's distinct. Do you want to add more?
Yeah, I'll just add, just to reiterate again, one of the last points is that even though the materiality is distinct, I think, well, So even though the materiality is distinct, and it depends, the materiality also differs from case to case in the sense that the material problem for a grid engineer has to do with its intermittency and turbulence, let's say. It might not be the same material properties that matter in other areas of the discussion, but it's also the case that it's not the materiality that's really salvational in the end. It's the proposition we would have is looking at the different sort of models of wind power that are trying to emerge and to institutionalize now in Mexico, that really has a lot more to do with what you might call the traditional anthropological dimensions of this rather than the anti-political dimensions of it that really matter. In other words, how you organize the wind power, how you distribute the resources, to what extent you take into account local environmental and social work.
And at the same time, it does have a kind of salvational potential, right? It's a sustainable form of energy depending on how it's captured. And so bringing it, sort of marrying the wind with the land is a really important piece here, because with the technology that we observed in the isthmus and that's currently widely available on the planet, land is absolutely fundamental. And so people live on that land, other non-human beings live on that land, it's agricultural land. That makes all the difference in the world because the termites themselves are very land intensive and not carbon neutral in their own right. So there is a relationship there that needs to be qualified. And yet we do hold out hope for renewable energy in the form of wind, in the form of water, in the form of biofuels. So these are important things to explore, we think, so that we don't reproduce the kind of petropolitics that industrializing logics have led us to. And in the isthmus, we see the potential to repeat that same framework, right? To use the kind of extractive processes, to use foreign transnational capital in order to do so, to create feelings of discontent in the region because of reasons of exploitation historically and present. So there's a way in which an Aeolian future can look very much like the petro-linearity that we currently occupy, and there's a way in which it can look different, depending on how we collectively approach it here and in the isthmus.
Hi, thanks. I wanted to pick up on something you just mentioned there, which was about agriculture. And I was struck by the metaphors that were being used to describe the production and collection of the wind. So you talked about, well, for a start, there wind farms. You talked also about the harvesting of the wind. And I think it's a great move to kind of think about the development of the wind power in relation to petropower. But as you said yourself, this is also a space where land is very important and where agriculture is at play. And I wonder if there's also a productive relationship to kind of think through between the histories of agriculture and agricultural production in that land and the modes of production that are being implied or thought through in relation to wind power. So one of the other things I was thinking about in relation to that was about futures. So the way in which food production and the problem of risk was historically dealt with through things like the futures markets. And it struck me that, one of the qualities that you're talking about wind is that the impossibility of capturing it in the form of the kind of futures market, because you can't at the moment save it in any kind of form. So it's kind of sketchy, but I just thought it was maybe an interesting comparison to think about what's being written and what's being talked about agriculture.
I mean, I'll just say that there's sort of two main ways that the Mexican federal and Oaxacan state governments have sought to rewrite that history that you're talking about. Because it's true, as I mentioned in one of the sections, that this has not been a region that's been, for most of its history, able to do intense, export-oriented agriculture, but it's done very well in terms of local agriculture. And one of the concerns that some of the people opposed to wind park is that there's lots and lots of land has been given over to wind turbines and being fenced off so that it can be monitored and maintained by those companies. And actually, local production of staple crops has skyrocketed, and it's becoming harder, especially for the poorest people in the region, to just feed themselves. But two things the state's done. One is they've suggested, and there's all these brilliant ad campaigns with pictures of a turbine and a cow and a some corn area that suggests that this is win-win-win. Because you can grow, keep growing, and have your cows running around, and you don't have to disrupt the ranching or the agricultural histories in order to accommodate wind farms. But the second one, and the one that's a little bit more pernicious, has been a lot of discourse about this has always been terrible agricultural land. It's so hard, the wind blows so hard that the corn is knocked over, it can only grow this high, so it isn't uprooted. And so there's been a kind of an effort by the state to suggest that this was never good agricultural land in the first place, which isn't strictly speaking true.
And yet there is some truth to the fact that wind parks are amenable to cattle production, right? And cattle can still graze around the turbine bases. There's a question about aquifers in the region as well, which are rather shallow or relatively shallow. And as they put in the base of the turbines, which is a massive amount of rebar and concrete that has to go down a certain depth, it actually disrupts the aquifers. So there's been a question about whether there's a kind of contaminative effect that's occurring in terms of the hydrocycle of the isthmus for future farming. Although there, as Dominic was saying, there's a lot of discourse about the kind of untenability of agriculture in the region and certain kinds of crops. I think, just thinking about the question of agriculture, one of the interesting things for us in this project has been thinking about wind as a resource differently than the resource of land and soil. And part of that interest has focused on what kind of patrimony the wind might inspire or create. And so we did a full-scale community survey in this little town of Anthropocene, and we asked residents, we knocked on every door 3 times with a team of people, and we got a very, very broad understanding of what the community felt about the wind parks. One of the questions we asked, among others, was, to whom does the wind belong? And people were a little baffled by this question, and we very carefully did not say who owns the wind, which is a different form of describing it, but to whom does it belong? And many of them responded that it belongs to God. Many responded that it belongs to us in the East Mall. It belongs to us as Mexicans. Teasingly and facetiously, it belongs to the wind companies, or maybe really truthfully. And so, thinking about how wind might create certain kinds of affective relationships, because there's lots of work out there, there's lots of evidence that people have a strong sense of connection to the earth, to their homelands, to the soil, to these agricultural places, right, where we can grow things and live and survive. And so the sense of patrimony around parcels of land seems pretty well trod territory. So one of our questions was how do people think about a patrimony that might be connected to the wind, or can you? Because the wind sort of comes, it belongs to no one, right? It belongs to no land. It's constantly shifting, it's moving across land, it's moving across water, it dissipates, it gets stronger. It's a kind of volatile and yet flexible kind of entity, right?
Okay, just we've got Cymene, then Annabelle, and then Emma.
Thank you for such a very rich talk. It's something I'm interested in. I was curious about your response to the first question in terms of the wind's materiality. I really like the way you're thinking about that materiality, but it will be interesting to hear what you think about its temporality. Because it seems to me that the contrast that you're drawing here is between the temporality of the wind, which is both fleeting and eternal, and the temporality of the infrastructure with which you access what that wind has to offer, which is finite yet permanent. And I wonder whether you would say something about that particular disjuncture which shapes the kind of politics that you are describing to us.
Well, yeah, I think temporality is a very important feature of this as well too. And I think there's a lot you could say about that. Obviously, one thing that comes immediately to mind is that moving from the wind has always established a certain temporality in business because it blows incredibly fiercely in the winter months, and then it dies down to the point where and people don't even try to do agriculture during those months because there's a feeling that the seeds won't take, the plants get blown over, and so there's been the wind has always affected the agrarian temporality of the region in specific ways. But I think that the temporality that probably has been most impactful with the coming of the wind parks, and again this is less than a decade still from when the first really big cluster began to take effect, is really this idea that these wind parks are on rental contracts in 20 or 30 years that automatically renew unless somebody says no. So that really you're looking at a taking over of land that where the infrastructure or temporality, if you will, has changed in a rather dramatic way. You can't repurpose fields, and I've talked a bit about the land occupations, which are very fluid and very lively across the region too. That's changed now that these parks are enclosed and fenced in, right, and have electrical fences around them and things like that to keep people away from them for danger reasons, but also it means that they can't be accessed for other types of reasons too. So I think that sense of coming to terms with this new perduring existence of wind parks and cements and access roads and fences, I think that's something that people are still coming to terms with, but it's something that people have expressed to us a lot of anxiety about. Also, say in La Ventosa, which is now circled by wind parks, they observe that we can't really grow anymore. Our community is in a way in tune within these wind parks because you can't live closer than 500 meters to a wind park. So the community can't grow anymore. What does that mean for our future? Right? Our children will have to move away even though we have prosperity because of the wind parks and so on.
And also connecting this back to Hannah's question about agriculture. Also, the land that is now being used for wind parks has been reclassified as an industrial zone rather than an agricultural zone. There's a lot of worry about that too in terms of the future. Because as these turbines become less and less functional, as their technology goes out of date, and it's the engineers themselves will tell you that after 20 years, they're basically useless. They've sort of done their time on Earth and they need to be disassembled. So there's a lot of anxiety about what will then happen to these industrial zones that used to be at least nominally agricultural. But I like this question too in the sense that connecting back to this question of the grid, this is always a temporal question too, right? So you have to capture the kinetic energy of the wind to turn the turbine, to create the electricity, and it has to be consumed basically within a millisecond. That's the temporality of wind and electricity. But there's also this sort of temporal inclination of the grid as well, and all of these worries that Dominic talked about in terms of renewables, which are both, with wind and solar, and all of them have this intermittency that engineers are very concerned about. And it's about how they temporally disrupt this grid that's supposed to be a well-operated machine. And in a lot of the material that I've read in the social sciences about the grid, the emphasis is always placed on the kind of the danger, the threat, the risk of these intermittent resources, instead of placing the question upon why we haven't taken the time to update our grids more efficiently in the promise of transitioning to more renewable forms. So it seems to me that there's often a kind of misplaced blame, if you will, upon renewable forms, when in fact, we might have been more visionary 10 years ago, 20 years ago, so that we would have updated this grid to be able to handle these forms, rather than sort of crying in our ear now about how difficult they are to incorporate, right?
Hello.
Thanks very much for a really rich paper. Over here. I'm over here. I just was interested, I'm doing a project which is on wind energy in Scotland, and it's amazing how many resonances there are with what's happening in Mexico, particularly in this relationship with land. But one of the issues I wanted to ask about, one of the concerns that comes up a lot actually, is the issue of labour around the parts and the assembling of the turbines themselves. They often seem to sort of appear out of nowhere in a sense, but actually people would question where these parts were coming from and the kind of labour that was entailed in that, and if there was any benefit to the local area. So there alienation around the fact that these parks were actually gathered from Denmark, Germany, the Isle of Wight, and nothing was actually coming to Scotland from the whole process of assembling those turbines as an infrastructure. So I was just wondering if there are any debates and narratives around the way that those turbines actually came to be and the kind of labour that was entailed in it, and how people felt that they were alienated or otherwise from that process.
Okay.
And there's a key awareness in the isthmus, even among the general population, that the turbines are manufactured in Denmark. That's very clear by the mark of the branding on the turbines themselves, their asbestos product. There's a less clear understanding about where the capital comes from. There's a sense, some people are aware that most of the investment is coming from Spain, companies like Iberdrola, which is the largest wind producer in the world. And there's also knowledge that there's investment from the United States. So in terms of the production of the turbines themselves, there was a plan at some point around 2009, 2010 to create what they were going to call a city of knowledge in the isthmus. And one of the projects that was going to take place there was to train engineers, local populations, white-collar jobs, to be able to learn how to operate wind parks and manage them. And there was also a plan to manufacture or begin developing a specialized turbine that can actually handle the especially turbulent wind in the isthmus. That has yet to pass. I think it was a pretty inspiring idea for some, but it hasn't yet come to fruition.
And except for say in the case of Laventosa, the families that were closely aligned with Porfirio Montero, they've been the ones who've been able to get sort of special clauses written into their contracts to get their nieces and nephews jobs, working as white-collar jobs as engineers and supervisors. So it's on a selected basis, yes. But as you probably know, there's a fair amount of construction labor in building a wind park. Once a wind park's built, it doesn't require that much labor to maintain it. So among the strongest, we have in this presentation, we didn't really talk as much about the truly contentious and violent politics that are also part of this story of blockades and resistance and harassments and death threats. And there's all of this is happening too. The people who are often positioned as being the ones who are the so-called golpeadores, the thugs, who are working on the street to harass people in resistance and communities in resistance to the parks, are typically affiliated with one of the construction unions because they've been promised steady work. As long as more and more wind parks get built, they're going to get good jobs and for a year or two, all these things get built, and then there'll be another park to move on to, and so forth. So there is a real politics of labor there, and union politics that's involved with this, not always very pretty, unfortunately. But yeah, there's a lot of attention to that side of it too. The other side, of course, is the resistance. Well, once those jobs are gone, there's just going to be a Spaniard sitting inside of inside an office. That's what labor is here doing. And so, I mean, both sides have claimed legitimacy.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you for that. That's very interesting. My question is a comparative one, really. I was comparing in my head as you were talking about the other energy resources, particularly oil and gas, and thinking about how this kind of resource compares on a number of levels with those other energy resources. In two areas there, in terms of the footprint, if you like, or impact, because both oil and gas are produced, so in a similar way to wind, they're not a resource until they are produced, and their value is determined by what they're worth on an economic market, in the same way as wind is. It's the demand for that resource itself, where the power and the resource comes from. So it's the infrastructure around the extraction that creates the impact and creates the footprint at the local level. And because of that impact and that footprint, we get the questions over futures and the questions over is there a future for these types of energy resources. And that's because, as Simone said, these are what we term finite resources. So it's not finite so much in terms of the resource as the same as is the same for wind. It's in terms of the infrastructure. So a development narrative is very hard to justify in those kind of contexts. But how does this compare to this kind of resource, this type of energy resource? Because it's not finite in the way that oil and gas is. So is the infrastructure in that respect permanent? And if the infrastructure is permanent, what kind of impact can that have in the development sense, if you like, at the local level?
So are you thinking about infrastructure in terms of the mechanical operation of turbines, or are you thinking of wind as an infrastructure itself?
No, as the actual turbines themselves. So thinking about your pictures, and those turbines, they are an enormous area of landscape. They take up a big area, so it's not just a single turbine, it's an area of land that is consumed by this infrastructure. And presumably there's other types of infrastructure and entanglements and so on and so forth that go with the production of wind for energy. It's not just solely turbines. So what kind of impact or footprint does this make in the kind of case study areas that you've been working with? And have you compared that to gas and oil, or is that just something that wasn't part of the project?
Well, in addition to the parks, as we've seen on their massive manifestation, there's also the requirement to evacuate the electricity that's been produced. And so you need to have lines, high tension wires, in order to do that. Those have an impact and an imprint, and there have been some politics around the placement of those wires, the structures that maintain them. And then there's also the case of the substation that we talked about, which is another required infrastructure for evacuating electricity. And it has a certain extensionality in the sense that it needs to cross tracts of land, because most of the energy is going toward Mexico City or toward the manufacturing plants like Coca-Cola and this big foods manufacturer and Walmart. So there's a way in which the infrastructure reflects the priorities of the state and the developers who are putting the parks into place, because you can sort of follow those lines right to where power is supposed to land and reside, right? So it's not going to local communities, interestingly enough, but it's going to the capital, it's going to the capitalists. And so that infrastructure, I think, is very indicative of where the ideological emphasis is in this project as well.
In terms of agriculture and traditional activities, is that supported by the industry in a kind of sustainable way?
Oh,
Maintaining agriculture?
Yeah, so the use of the land, the displacement of people from that use of the land for agriculture, is that all being?
I think that's a really key discourse among wind park developers, is that you're not losing your land. We're not taking your land, we're renting it. We're leasing it for 30 years. We're changing the designation to an industrial zone. But you can still graze cattle, you can still farm around the roads and the turbines. So that's a really integral discourse. And some farmers agreed with that and said, yes, this is the greatest thing ever. I can rent a space for the turbines, and I can also keep my cattle, and it's a wonderful thing. Other people have other questions. One of the things we heard repeatedly was that turbines themselves drip oil and have toxic emissions, basically, that people were concerned about contaminating the land itself and possibly harming cattle and getting into the water tables. So that was another kind of question about whether these turbines are actually sustainable vis-a-vis agriculture.
it's really difficult to summarize the politics of infrastructure, because as you can imagine, the complex, and because infrastructure at its core is about enablement. It really depends on what you want to enable. And in the case of the people who are working in the comunas and asambleas, the vision of the future they want to enable does not involve all this concrete and Walmarts and new industries. For other people, it does. So what you saw is just a lot of polarization over different potential futures towards which both wind power could be put, but as well as just the idea of developing what people call mega projects.
I think I'd just like to bring up, I don't think we have Gavin Bridge in the room, our colleague from geography here, but he has written very interestingly about how, you kind of like to say, if we were more intelligent thinking about our infrastructures and made them more flexible, you could redesign infrastructure for renewable energy generation in a very different landscape of infrastructure for renewables. That's what a very beneficial. We have next is Francesco down here.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It is very useful to me. I'm working in the same area and in the same themes. And I would like to ask something about the other power, the power over the window of resistance, as the people mentioned, the people talk, the force of resistance that they are putting on against this industrialization of the ethnos, and about the concept of sustainability. I would like to know how you manage this concept, because it's clear that in that area we are facing a clash again between two forms of conceiving sustainability. One that is the Aeolian power, the green energy, and the other one that it is the own local idea of sustainability, and they are clashing. So how do you manage this concept there? Also, as anthropologists, what can we do? Because we know very well the problem of mitigation, but also we know very well the problem of local people. And so how can we manage with this idea of different ideas of sustainability? And the other question is more specific about the weapons of resistance that people over there are using against the fires. And specifically, how do you think that they are using or not their cosmology as a form of as a weapon against in the discourses against the projects? Because in my experience about ecos, not sabotage, but ecos, I know very well they have a very important, very strong ideology about the weather, about the elements of the wind, but not only the wind, other elements of the weather that are.
Francesco, we've only got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, sorry. That are important, but in my idea, they are not using this cosmology as a form of resistance. They are not patrimonializing these elements, and I would like to know why, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think we spent a little time in some of these too. So we have a little bit, maybe not as much time as we spent in and around Calman and Tosa, but I think that generally I would agree with you. There was recourse to, there was a kind of a neo-indigeneity in a sense, that there was a kind of a discourse that might not surprise you about indigenous peoples are better stewards of land and resources, but it really was participating, I think, in a more global discourse on this, and not one that seems to be specific to, let's say, Vinisari Coates, cultural cosmologies. We did see that, and one of the reasons we wanted to talk about Vietnam is that there are, Vietnam is this wonderful city of just, cultural creativity and Zapotec Renaissance at all times. And, there's an intellectual class that's very interested in exploring these issues, but less so, with the farmers, frankly, with the winners. So it's interesting that they don't, but I also think you can interpret, say, that idea that the wind belongs to God as thinking about wind as sacred force, wind as life-giving, world-forming force too, which I think does intersect with ideas of salvational possibilities that the wind could bring in complex ways. As to what anthropologists can do, I think you pinpointed it. This was the position we were in constantly. We could see both sides, and we are strong advocates for energy transition at the same time that we were really disturbed by how energy transition was happening in this region because of how much of it was being created in Mexico City and Madrid, and how little of it was attending to. They had already decided what they were going to do before they showed up there, and they sort of presented people, this is the plan, take it or leave it. So the whole design process was very lopsided in terms of its attentiveness to local interests, communities, historical legacies, anything like that. So yes, it puts anthropologists in a bind. It puts us in a bind as citizens of a warming world. I wouldn't just limit it to anthropologists, but I think that's why this sort of fine-grained analysis is so important. So you can see the dynamics at work, the force clusters at work, and the fact that there are alternative emergent forms that actually have to be resisted. Because one of the reasons why Mexico is so fearful is if this Ixtepec project was allowed to work, it would discredit every other wind park that's been built. Because its model redirects most of the profits, or a much larger share of the profits, to the community, rather than to filling out the quarterlies of a bank. And so there are these, so you can become involved with those potentialities.
Just really quick, I know that we're out of time, basically, but I wanted to go back to this idea of what are we sustaining by what is supposed to be living here. And I think you really hit upon the paradox of these questions that we're trying to address, and that is there is an environmental imperative to reduce greenhouse gases for our atmosphere, and that's something that's important for all living beings on the entire planet. So that's a good question. At the same time, there is an set of environmental concerns at the local level where these answers are being implemented. And that's the real paradox at work here. What are we trying to sustain? Are we sustaining local cosmologies and histories and approaches to land and air and water? Or are we sustaining a kind of global bios? Where is our emphasis?
Okay, I know Andrea had one more question. Okay. In that case, I think we all put our hands together and show great appreciation for our wonderful visit.